This is the Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located in Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am on Treaty Number 8 territory, the traditional meeting grounds and gathering places of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Hello, everybody, and what is most likely the final episode of the Non-Tech Show for 2024. Probably, 29th, we still got a few days, but in all likelihood, in this, the best of all possible worlds, which is to say the only world that we all share, it is the end of the year, and so we're doing a bit of a reflective back and forthing about what our respective holidays have been like, Dr. Doug and I, and we're just both really pleased to see you here. And so, above and beyond what we were just kind of getting into there, Doug, is there anything you wanted to share or speak to with our listenership before we kind of get into this pretty pertinent topic, I'd say, for the end of the year?
Yeah, thanks for that. One thing I've noticed in the last week or so is I lost track of what day it is, and that is the most glorious feeling. I don't know what day of the week it is. Like, I have a standing gaming night with a buddy of mine on Saturdays, and he sent me a text saying, "Hey, what do you?" I'm like, "Oh crap, it's Saturday tomorrow." Like, that's so I ended up into the flow of I don't know what day it is, and super happy about that. And I actually got projects done. I was building a charcuterie board for my wife. I built a
charcuterie board. Well played, sir. Was it well received, the charcuterie board?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
She was very appreciative of my efforts. And I built it's a cutting board for my mother-in-law. She was here when Fiona hit, that hurricane. And so I had some wood that finally dried out enough that I could use from wood that fell during Fiona. And I made a butcher block cutting board out of that. And did I learn lessons? It took forever. And next time I do it, it'll take about a third the time because I don't have to do that thinking anymore, which is welcome to lifelong learning, I guess.
Well, the terrain has already been mapped. So, that's cool stuff, man. So, Fiona, when you gave me that very thoughtful gift, the now playing for the vinyls when I was collecting the vinyls, that was from the same tree that you're talking about? The same thing that... no? Okay.
Same storm.
Same storm, different tree.
Yeah, yours was maple, and this was all beechwood. So...
Dang! Okay.
It's one of those things. They fell and somebody said, "Hey, if you want to come take it." So I took timber. I now know how to shape timber into boards. And it's like, whoa, I'm not going to complain about Home Depot ever again. Because, oh my God, it takes a lot of time and effort. But there's a pride in learning how to do it for me. So,
of course, my goodness, how could there not be? How, ladies and gentlemen, could there not be? So the topic that we're on about this go round is instructional design. I'm going to yank that away from Doug, and I'm even going to say that for this one, I had actually sort of towards the end of the term suggested this one as a possible topic. I didn't necessarily mean the next one we were going to do. For those who keep track, we kind of went through a bit of a slow period in terms of the production. there are a couple of episodes that are sort of waiting for Doug's all-important seal of approval. He has a critical eye, which he definitely catches some stuff, and it's part of a robust professional and academic process, if you want to know, folks, as part of the endeavor. But we put out, so that's 4, and then plus this one. I guess 5 for the semester. As far as it goes, September to December isn't that bad. But we went through a period where those 2 were just sitting there for a while, and that was because I was just so far into a what do we call it? Vortex of grading. My fellow English and humanities teachers may know what I'm going through here a bit, and it was just so voluminous, and there were so many attendant issues because every paper has a student attached to it, and every student is a very complex individual, multifaceted with certain kind of needs, and as well that go along with the needs of the cohort, and each cohort being pretty specific, as well as within the context of a specific institution with a specific mandate, as it were, to achieve certain outcomes. It's been a while since I've been back in that particular saddle, folks, and I was going through a lot in terms of just let's call it cognitive space. Let's call it bandwidth. I had a relationship that sort of lasted all of 6 weeks that I was kind of in the midst of. And again, right, it's just, so for me, I'm kind of like reaching towards the familiar a bit when I asked Doug about this topic. And specifically, when I first became a teacher, and I think I've even mentioned it on this show, when I was in South Korea, when I was in Seoul, South Korea, my first go round doing teaching of any variety, ESL to small kids, teenagers, and even a few adultish kind of people in there, but mostly it was younger students. And the only thing that really saved me from feeling like a complete and utter failure is just this, expatriate sort of dude on a stick with a curriculum was like instructional design. So like, how do I shape this into something that's going to be engaging? How do I take curriculum and actually turn it into something that's going to be meaningful and engaging to students, and particularly engaging? Because if you can get them to enjoy being in the room with you, then it almost doesn't matter what you say or do, almost. And it's important that the content is right. It's important that the teaching and your curriculum objectives are fine. But if they are, then I have found that structuring the flow of educational activities in and of itself is a worthwhile endeavor. And to that end, that was the specialty for my MN degree through University of New Brunswick. I did end up specializing in instructional design, which in itself became kind of like, okay, e-learning, that actually could be something that I step into from this. So that's really long-winded wind up on this for me, Doug. And again, I just appreciate that you threw this one in as our last episode of the year. Did you want to say anything about it from your standpoint, above and beyond just kind of my pretty significant tirade? That's what I'll call it. But what are you thinking on this one here, Doug, before we get into the references?
This one, I was sure I knew, right? I have my master's degree in it. I did a bunch of it in my PhD. I've been an instructional designer. I've taught instructional design. I did all that, and I went through, and I found out that I think I was living a lie, which is neat. Okay, if I were to ask you the history of instructional design, right, where would you start? Would you start in like American psychologists in World War II? Is that?
Well, okay, so from my standpoint, I really have approached it not from a like academic standpoint as such. It's been something that I've sort of picked up as practice. And in fact, the area that I live in, or that I grew up in, rather not live in now, but grew up in southern New Brunswick in Fredericton, there was a pretty strong nascent e-learning industry. There were some of these, corporate training and e-learning firms going back actually as far as the, mid to late 1990s. They set up shop. The Canadian military has a pretty strong presence. CFB Gagetown. It's actually the largest Canadian Forces land base in Canada, and it's nearby. And so while I was in my 20s, I sort of spent some time just observing that, and people around you work for this place, and so it had a pretty strong representation in the programming that the UNB School of Education kind of put forward, right? Because they're trying to place people within the local job market. So it really became something for me where it was something that was already kind of around in the area, and like the bricolage approach, right? The constructionist notion that we've advocated here for, kind of pick up what's around you. Well, okay, I know that at a certain point, some semblance of instructional design sort of got me to a point of self-efficacy as a teacher, right? With those Korean students in that context, even though I didn't have the terminology for it, that's what it was, instructional design. Handouts. I did a lot of handouts, associated activities off the handouts. I realized once I go in with a personalized handout that lets them take the stuff that they're doing in the class and apply it in their own creative little way, off you get, right? And so that's why the strong draw towards online learning for me. Just, you sort of take a template, you sort of take a general sort of set of parameters, and then the personalization is what makes it special. So I guess at this point, I'm just going to say, like, from the history standpoint, I've given you kind of my personal history with it. If I was to just sort of say, well, based on as it's been presented, you alluded to it. We are talking American psychology, mid-19th, closely associated with the Canadian or with the American military. And I'm thinking here particularly, that's the background on the ADDIE model, right? The very, well-regarded, well-vetted assessment, development, design, implement, evaluate, right? And for sure, that's like the most well-known, most cited instance of, well, that's an instructional design format. That's an instructional design area of practice. I've taught ADDIE. I've cited ADDIE within job interviews. It's been something where, like, you can sort of put that in front of people and you go, okay, what is instructional design? Well, that's an example, right? So I don't know if that even remotely answers your question, but that's sort of where I tend to go with it from a historical standpoint, I suppose.
And I have told many people, okay, yeah, it really got going when the Americans had joined World War II and had to militarize, like they had to bring up 1 million plus soldiers and teach them all really quickly and all that kind of stuff. That was like the institutionalization of it. But as I dug into this, we've kind of wandered away from that, and we're trying to come back. It's like when you walk into the woods and it's like, is there a path here? Or where are we going? How are we getting there? And I thought the path was clear. And the more reading I did, because I've read all the articles about that history, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's it. And then I went and found a bunch more stuff in the direction I hadn't planned to go initially when we started talking about instructional technology and how they got together and what they're doing. And it was the neat. I enjoyed
history of instructional design. That's awesome, man. You found a new history. You found a new way forward. Well, and that linkage to technology, I'll just tell you. I mean, for me as a young man, in my early 20s, right when the internet was starting to kind of take off as a popular format, I didn't see it necessarily as being like my career is going to be significantly around this. I just remember thinking, this is pretty damn unique, and I don't think humans are going to be the same after it. And I think I'm going to have to reevaluate how I sort of look at the world based on this, is sort of what it ended up looking like for a few years there. I don't know if you had that experience. I mean, you're a little bit older than me, not that much. But I mean, again, this phenomenon you're talking about, right? Like, I don't know. I just think it comes back to like a very personal, lived experience, which makes this sort of pertinent to me. I don't know if that has anything for you there, Doug.
Yeah, and that ties into the England 95 article about instructional technology that it found.
Well,
Past,
it does.
present, future. And one thing England talks about is it's not really a field of study. In 95, it wasn't really a field of study, but it's a step-by-step method. It was the cookbook, right? You open up the cookbook and you follow the steps, and presto, you've done instructional technology. And it really is a form of behaviorism at that point.
Yes.
Where it's rigid, mechanistic, linear, anti-humanistic, right? It's behaviorism. How do we adjust it? And because they weren't talking about people. They were talking about hardware. They were talking about outputs and productions of materials. And there's only one solution: training. That's the only solution. And it's like, oh, I have hated all those things individually. I never tied it up into a nice bow, and I've never seen the research that did that, because this article was too old for me to use on my thesis. I started my PhD in 2001, and my supervisor, who I love dearly, I went to him with an article from 93, and he's like, nope, that's too old. Don't use it. He goes, in this field, he said, by the time you finish your research proposal, most of this literature is going to be out of date. Right? That's the speed at which things were moving. So
I did my doctorate on MOOCs, so I have some appreciation of what you're describing there. Yeah.
Welcome to the cutting edge. It's like, yeah, that stuff we did yesterday.
As soon as you express it, it's like it's like you're running for the train, and the train is moving ahead, and you just get on, and then that's how long you get to be on the cutting edge, right? Just as long as it takes for you to just jump onto that train, and then the train takes off, and then you're no longer on the cutting edge. You're just, it's just a thing that just becomes a daily occurrence that just, for a second there, I was almost relevant.
Yes. And with this, it brings the focus back to where I want the focus to be, and what I think because we're the ed non-tech podcast, and in 95, instructional technology there was no people involved. It was all the technology. It was all the production of stuff. The student didn't fit there.
When you're talking about behaviorism and stuff, and I'm just sitting there kind of chuckling, I'm just like, I know it goes against what we talk about on the show, but part of me is just like, yeah, man, give me the ultimate template. Just give me the ultimate all-purpose template that will reach it's kind of like the Holy Grail. It's like the learning object that will de facto solve all of your training needs. I mean, it's just like, it'll be a singing, dancing, learning machine. It's like, I reckon that's when I first saw how effective wikis could be as a teaching thing and professional development thing. That was kind of, or when the first time I saw Google Docs being used by students in a computer lab that I was teaching, I was like, okay, there may be something here that kind of appeals to my kind of latent interest, creativity generally, like this, like, so for you, right? It's kind of, if you were to sort of liken the impulse towards creating instruction towards the same kind of approach that you would take to your shaping of wood-felled or storm-felled timbers and the like, for me, it's very much akin to, like, when I'm writing the notes for the music show, or when we're doing this or that, I have this kind of literary flair. I kind of have this interest that now I get to be more front and center with it as a teacher. But it all sort of comes from the same impulse, the same interest in doing something cool, doing something creative. And once the interactive so-called 2.0 internet An antiquated term, it must be said. Again, Web 2.0. Once that became the user's internet, as opposed, it was like, okay, game on, off we get, right? So I think, again, like when you see this kind of literature from 95, oh, and this next one, Riser from 2001, that's still pretty far back in the Wayback Machine, my friend. But those are kind of the moments where like the internet was kind of percolating and kind of just like the potential was kind of starting to make itself felt in the public sphere. And that's when I, going back 20 years, that's before I was a teacher. But when I was connected to like a computer monitor, that was like during the ABIS days. That was when I sat there taking 4.5 years I spent connected to a headset, doing American phone call and doing data entry such that they could book a car with Avis Car Rentals. 4.5 years I did that.
Wow.
Right? Cognitive routines, interfacing with technology. I mean, it was like, I can do this or I can go somewhere else and do something like this at the end of the day. I just kind of rationalized it that way. The whole call center thing deserves its own thing, and I won't be going any further with it, but it was on my mind. It was on my mind in this sort of formative internet kind of era, and it was part of my, the interface, just like headset, computer, script, right? Like before I became a teacher, that was just like, man, I have to friggin' figure something out because this English degree plus working in the call center just ain't doing it for me. And so now it's something I can refer to and go, oh, well, that was weird. But in a lot of key ways, it's shaped my friggin' cognitive equipment. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm now predisposed to the kinds of interfaces and engagements that online learning, online teaching and learning, like, it's the corporations have already done the job on me. Cognitive programming, I suppose, in a way. Jeepers creepers, getting pretty far into the weeds here, man. But 2001 with the Riser, was there anything else you wanted to speak to about this Anduin before we get more properly into Riser, my friend?
No. Riser's article is called A History of Instructional Design and Technology, and the field was still emerging the way we understand it now. It was headed in our direction now. It was more mainstream. Because I remember in the year 2000, I had a cousin of mine say, so you're doing a master's. Well, what are you going to do? And I was like, oh, it's going to be instructional design. And he goes, I have no idea what that means. And then I realized,
I've heard that so many times. Can you tell me what that is? And I'm like,
Yeah. And so basically that conversation in this Riser article go hand in hand. Because
nice.
What I learned, what I was led to understand was, it was how do we use media for instructional purposes? And what are the processes? That is,
exactly.
I'm boiling down a lot of learning into two points.
That's the conventional answer, though. That's a good one. Yeah. I wish I had that in some job interviews. I might have gotten some jobs, if I'd been able to say that as succinctly as you just did.
Oh, I'm reading from Riser's list, so kudos to Riser. But
well done, Ryan.
But yeah, and they talk about instructional design procedures, and they say, oh, it's called instructional design, and it's like the procedures are the important bit. Like I want that silver bullet too, right?
That's
I want
the
that
learning moment right
magic
there.
formula, whatever that magic formula happens to be, and it's like, it's. That
I had such struggles though. Some like struggles. A lot of my course, which I plan to maintain, my teaching load was that students would be given pretty wide rein to choose their own topics. And some of them they knocked it out of the park. I mean, I have some media-based things. I have some things that are just sitting there on public websites right now that I just need to get students' permission to like, can I share this? Because some of it actually deserves a hearing. But boy, oh boy, so when the students who didn't get it, I mean, that's where I have to go, okay, this is like, you really, if you're going to give students like all this power to be able to choose their own assignment, and you think you're setting it up and you're scaffolding it well, you have to account for the fact that no matter what you do, a certain percentage just are going to miss it. Like no matter how much you put up there. And so, okay, I'm seeing a presentation about a project in an English class, but the topic has nothing to do with English literature whatsoever. It's like a historical based topic for a discipline outside of English. It had nothing to do with any of the books. It had nothing to do with anything on the curriculum. It was literally like, we think, and so I'm like, so what led to this? That's what I have to ask myself. What led to this, right? What led to this? And so your emphasis here on procedure, right? Like, okay, well, what were the procedures through which these 2/3, 3/4 of the students did okay or better, and 10% of them just knocked it out of the park? That's great. But then for this 15 to 20% who just probably closer to 15, maybe more like 10, just completely missed the boat. Just whew. So what do you do in those circumstances? You look at your procedures, right? It's just like what. So again, it's just experiences that I've had that have like, this is no longer abstract, this stuff. This is like, okay, I actually am bouncing this off of my lived experience, right? So
yesterday I finished building the end grain cutting board for my mother-in-law, and I took a picture of it and sent it to a friend of mine who's very supportive of all the stuff that I build. And then I took a picture of my workbench, right? Because the picture is very, here it is, doesn't that look pretty? Look, it's all shiny and it's all squarey and all that stuff. And then I took a bigger picture. It's like, here's what the real picture is. And it was like, ugh. And the reply back was, the creative process is chaotic. And I love the key. I love that awesome. For me. Yeah, it was such a wonderful quote, and I love it for me. But how do we allow the creative, chaotic component and still have rules and procedures to keep people in the boundaries of where you need them to be?
Robust QA processes are needed, man. That's it. And like, I mean, I don't mean to like sort of, be all hyperbolic upon, what I saw with my students. And I mean, honestly, no matter what, there's always going to be just like, I don't know. I don't like putting things into percentages. There's just a few like noteworthy cases where like, wow, I thought I was making something really clear until the exact moment I saw what you turned in. I got to have some of those moments, and I'm like, okay, interesting, things to know for next time. And this is where like the life of an educator, I think, can be really rewarding. The life of an educator, it's one of those things where it's like, you can't ever get comfortable. You always got to be moving forward. And if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And that's just because it's such a dynamic field. It's so reliant on moment by moment human interactions. And so to that end, one thing I did find myself thinking, there's this instructor I had in the B.Ed program who he did like 20 years as a school principal and then got into being a prof. And one thing that he said was, if you're going home tired at the end of a day of teaching, then you're doing something wrong. There's something up with that. If you're coming back from it where you're just like depleted, then there's something wrong. And I've gone back to that. I'm like, man, I don't know. After the tsunami of marking from the midterm, I definitely had moments where like, I don't know if I have like energy on the weekend for anything other than just lying in bed and staring at my feet. It was interesting. So this stuff like, so it's like when you're talking about like your creative process, when you're talking about where you are with your woodwork and your carving and these other, lifelong learning kind of pursuits you put yourself into. Like, of course, there's no specific endpoint here. It's just like you want it to be as good as it can, right? It's something where when I used to do marathons, when I used to do like half marathons, I did one marathon. I can't put the plural on that, but I did a bunch of half marathons, and or with like literary writing. It's just you're not in it to do anything other than just challenge yourself and and grow as a person. And that's something that I definitely threw in front of my students. Just Kurt Vonnegut, I don't know if you've seen it on Facebook, his whole thing about like do art badly, right? Like write a bad poem, right? Like that. It goes around one of these. I assume we're algorithmically similar. We might catch some of that same kind of memes and such. But that quote, I referred to that a few times during my term. I'm like, listen, you can. I give creative writing option. I'm like, here's your opportunity to write like, a story or a poem or just something, right? And again, I got some really cool submissions from that. So going way into the weeds here, my man. But I
do have the
personalization aspect of it.
I have the notes ready for an episode on marking when we have the brain space. That's not today, but we can certainly get there for sure.
I can't go there.
I know you can.
I can go there in 2025.
Yeah.
After I've completely done my sort of post-mortem on my last term, and after I've completely got everything set up for my next term, it won't even be that long, but that's when I'll be like, okay, let's get at her, pitter patter, right? But at this point, I'm just like, man, I got a whole lot of still things to learn from what just transpired before I can speak to that. So, but I am looking forward to that one. That will be a good one, I think.
Yeah, and if we do it in April or May or June, whatever, it's there, ready for what we want to do.
February or March, even, just like
okay.
I'm a week out for. 9 days.
It's too close.
Yeah, that's all.
It's one of those too soon things. When you make a comment, too soon.
I can't even really properly account for what I've been doing for the past 9, 7, whatever days, except that it's completely centered on wellness. I just my real major takeaway from all this pretty intense amount of activity, just busyness, being busy as we all are. But what I've really come away from it just the past few months, the past semester, is nothing. There's no substitute for wellness. There's no substitute for quality of life. There's no substitute for how comfortable and healthy and well and engaged and present in the moment that you happen to be. That's all any of us have. And I have never really been great at prioritizing that. It's sort of something I've had to learn sort of as I've gone a bit older. But wow, it has been completely apparent to me that if you want to have any sort of level of being long-term, if you want sustainability within a career in education, where there are so many individual people trying to, have proper engagement with you, there's so many small relationships that need to be managed there, that if you're not looking out for yourself in terms of wellness, in terms of self-care, in terms of just taking care of yourself, then you're not going to be that person that other people are relying on you for, as well as it not being a good experience just in the moment, right? So I'm just now everything. I'm just like, what can I do, A, to make this moment as good as it can be, and B, to make these moments going forward, not, this whole like time and evaluation clusterfuck is what it can turn into. I'm not saying that's what it did turn into, but I'm saying I know what it's like from within my career as a whole is what it is. And so it's like,
and this is how instructional design can help that.
Precisely. God help us. God love us. God love us all. God help us and God love us all. So are we now?
I want to jump to the Earl Beck 2011 article about educating for instructional design and technology future. And this resonated with me, some of the quotes from Earl Beck, because they said at a master's level, the emphasis should be shifted from training students to be users of instructional technology to preparing them to manage, supervise, and inspire others to use it. Because I know I learned how to use the technology. The actual leadership and training and supervising thing didn't really happen in my master's degree, right? Because it was all very individualized. And then Earl Beck goes further to say a doctoral student should be able to identify, modify, and develop an instructional design theory. And I know that I didn't teach that when I was teaching PhD students about instructional design. So I like the way it's take what's there and build from it. Because how many people doing a PhD in instructional design would be able to actually know and define more than Addie? Right? How would they?
Well,
that's a direction to go.
It's good at providing prescriptions. But what's cool, though, I do appreciate here, when you are talking about the objectives of a doctoral program, it is to be able to make original contributions to knowledge in your area. That's kind of what differentiates a doctoral thesis from any other kind of thesis. I know that's the idea with a master's thesis. I'm not diminishing that, but it is meant to be sort of in the moment that you submit your work, it is meant to be creating some substantial amount of original knowledge, or presenting it at least in a way that is original with your commentary. And I see, I've had opportunities within my career to come up with ad hoc conceptual frameworks. Yep. I've had opportunities within my career to go, okay, like I'm actually going to create a visual representation of the process that needs to happen relative to the learning environment, say, relative to how we're going to be operationalizing the intended operationalization of this training. I mean, I spent a whole year doing e-learning work, almost a full year, doing e-learning work for a security organization prior to this. So again, this instructional design stuff is just kind of sitting kind of in the front of my brain, a lot of the time without getting a lot of play. But if I look at sort of how I've been able to go, okay, how do I make sure that next semester just, is awesome as it can be, I can go, okay, well, now I can sort of take the evaluation practices on this, take the instructions, take the Moodle aspects of this, looking at it holistically and analytically, and just sort of making adjustments. And having some kind of knowledge or background in instructional design makes you go, okay, so was this an evaluation issue, or was this an engagement issue? What do you have to sort of identify? What part of the structure needs to be updated relative to the thing? It gives you a greater diagnostic capability, which I think has been really quite valuable for me as a practitioner in this area, I suppose.
And to jump back a little bit, when we're talking about the difference between like a master's thesis and a PhD or a doctoral thesis, in my experience, because I was doing ed tech stuff, the master's was proof that I could do research that was repeatable. Like people could come up with the same sort of results. And then the doctoral research was create new knowledge.
Yeah, very much.
That's the step that I think you just described when you're talking about, okay, what happened before? How do I make sure it's better next time? It's better for the students, or we operationalize it better, or whatever the steps are. That's the new knowledge.
Praxis.
Yeah,
it's praxis. It's having a wide range of analytic capability, knowledge of current practice and theory in the field, generally speaking, and then having that background being able to bring that to bear in the teaching moment. That's, I think, the value of this field. Again, whether you call it instructional design or, I mean, there's various sort of competing jargons or terms, but as a lot of these readings have demonstrated, the aspects which instructional design deals with are pretty fundamental in their own right. And it's just like small changes. It's not like you don't have to, but it's small changes with the view of like, we have a map, we have a structure, we have a way forward, so that when we know, say, to go after the blown out shingles as opposed to replacing the soffit on the thing, right, or whatnot. I'm pretty sure I just did a pretty half-assed home construction metaphor, but hopefully you see what I'm getting at, right? Again, like, you got the map, you make the small tweaks, right? It's like, is this something that requires, just go to Canadian Tire for a $10 purchase for a certain, widget? Or is it something where, like, I actually have to, renovate the entire side of the thing? It's like calling a contractor or something. It's just instructional design helps you figure out, is it just like, go get the thing at Canadian Tire, DIY it myself in under an hour, or call in the support, or actually just completely raise the structure, archive the shit out of it, and start afresh. I mean, this is what, like, that decision-making process, having good knowledge to inform those decisions, is really what instructional design can provide, in my opinion.
And that leads us to the 2017 article by West, Thomas, Bodley, Wright, and Borup, where they took a look at instructional design and technology departments and said students might graduate with a degree in the field where they've actually learned and done very little concerning the actual practice of instructional design or evaluation or research. And all the stuff you just described with your house maintenance is all three of those things, right? It's like, oh, what are we doing here? How do we evaluate it? How do I do the research? Like, all of those things. So they can get a master's degree and still not know what the basics of what we're saying they need to know.
Well, there's no excuse for time in the chair as a writer. That's what I've been telling people. You can't just sort of say, well, I want to be a writer, and it's just, or like, I want to be a carpenter, but you got to spend a certain amount of time carpenting, for instance. Carpenting. See what I did there? And it's just like, there's no excuse for time in the chair. And so if you're giving people, these master's degrees, and I don't mean to give it the air quotes, but I mean, master's degrees, anybody can do a master's degree. Like, a 2-year master's degree is far less of a commitment than a 4-year bachelor's degree. There's far less on the curriculum, even, because you pretty much get to specialize the shit out of it. It's just like, so for me, it comes down to, again, what's the cost recovery based on offering a program? And master's degrees in education are just like a no-brainer. If you're a faculty of education, it's like, yes, we will take these professionals in the field largely. We will take people who have steady income because they're probably hired in the field already. They're going to do this stuff part-time while they're working, a lot of them. I mean, it just, for all the financial reasons, it makes all kinds of sense to provide those kinds of credentials. And so you have people coming into it who just sort of see it as, you've talked about this before a lot in the show, we're disciplined with soft boundaries. So it's like somebody coming in who's just spent no time in the classroom, hasn't had what you call any kind of conventional educational, training, like as a teacher or anything like that whatsoever. It's just like, well, I qualify with it. I got grades in this other area, and I get to have a master's in a thing. And it just, okay, you came out of it knowing the procedures without having any or very limited, anyway, opportunities to see how this stuff plays out with your user group, your students. And I think if you don't have that experience engaging with students / users for your educational programming or software, then you're missing out on a key aspect of it, and your ability to make judgments is going to be not as robust as it could be, because you have missed that key, like, how do you deal with them in the room? How do you deal with them on the screen when you're trying to herd them into a Zoom session? If you haven't done at least that kind of stuff before, then what you bring to the field after your credential is probably going to be fairly limited, or at least limited in terms of viable educational practice, I suppose. That's a lot, Doug. That's a lot.
It really, really is. What I want to do
Thanks
is
for the
jump.
opportunity to vent, I suppose. I've been meaning to say some of that stuff for a while, I think.
I get that distinct impression. You kind of had that locked and loaded. So I have one more article.
With a master's degree in instructional design, and I'm also pretty critical of master's degrees in instructional design.
Me too.
It's an interesting thing to be saying, but there we go. So, was there anything else for this one, or are we going to jump now into Molenda?
Molenda 2022, History and Development of Instructional Design and Technology. And this is a completely different spin, and it's a happy spin. I wanted to end on a happier note, because some of this stuff was shocking and lifelong learning for me. But the happy note is scientific advancements happen, and then they spin off, and education picks up what they can. It's like Word and Excel, the Microsoft products. Neither of them were meant for education, but we use them well. A lot of people have learned, but they had some better examples. Like they had, like, the invention of the steam-driven rotary press, coupled with lithography, the invention of lithography. Suddenly, mass production of large format color prints was a thing. It's like, oh, I always just assumed people could do big pictures and put them on the walls, right? I never thought about what school was like before then, but I can look back and you could see like big chalkboards and people just writing everything with no pictures of anything. And it was things like photography, because there was no images before. Suddenly there's photography, and now we have pictures of stuff. Or the incandescent light bulbs, and look what happens with that in education. They had all this kind of cool stuff that went on because something happened in society. And as instructional designers, how do we get there? How do we say, look at that and say, how can I leverage that to help the students learn? Right? How do I design the learning that they're already doing and they need to do to include this to help them get there quicker, easier, more efficiently, whatever the words are you want to use. So I just really thought this concept was cool.
100%. I completely appreciate how we've moved from basically mid-1990s all the way to just something that's out a couple of years ago. So you kind of done a nice survey of the history of the discipline while speaking to this topic, generally speaking, in as much as it is a discipline, which I think is still pretty porous and still pretty loosey-goosey, but we'll use the term colloquially, if not in true descriptive fashion. So was there anything else before we sort of got into those three key items that we typically have at the end of the episode, as well as the visuals?
No, that was about it, other than it was interesting for me because I do have a couple of degrees in this, and I have done it for 20 odd years, and I was still learning when I took the new spin and new approach to it. So that made me feel good. It's like, okay, I haven't got a closed mind about this. I'm still open to learn. I'm still open to engage with what I know and how does this impact that. So it was nice. It was nice for me, especially in December, because I know we have very different jobs right now. So having that little
Well,
bit of space to be creative was nice for me.
yeah. Well, one of the things that I think instructional design as a sort of area has, and one of the things that makes it appealing for me is that it gives me a viable way to make things interesting for students. And so when I am talking about making things interesting for students, again, I'm saying very much like the option to do a personally meaningful final project in a media format of some variety, as opposed to strictly a research paper. And for those who have achieved well on the final project, I'm seeing things that have multiple literacies at work. I'm seeing things that are showing critical discernment, not just within, say, reading a text or sort of producing responses to that text in written format, but in the way that it is being presented through online and the like. And so this is where, like, I've used some of our interviews for podcasts in my classes. So I sort of threw something at you to one point as like, we should do a thing about podcast as praxis or something like this. But honestly, it has been part of what I've been involved in. And in terms of teaching, for sure. And even within my professional development plan, part of my professional development plan is to have a series of podcast-like interviews with practicing writers. And like, I'm already kind of doing that anyway, but now it's something where if you could bring that in and sort of have that as a feature within a professional development plan that's agreed to with the institution, which in this case it is, it's very rewarding to be able to set things up for students to be able to maybe have experiences that they wouldn't have necessarily been able to do otherwise. And when I've seen some of these websites, when I've seen some of these videos and the things that have come in, I'm just like, wow, I would not have anticipated this as a final sort of output from this, because they all end up being just as individual as the people who created them. And the papers are awesome too, don't get me wrong. But when you give people the opportunity to do things outside the typical, format, this is where an instructional design knowledge, anyway, not even necessarily a background, can become helpful, because it gives you more opportunities to pass on to your students at the end of the day. So I think that's probably the final thought that I would have on any of this. I could see a part 2 for this topic probably at some point down the line. But did we want to get into the word and phrase in question of the podcast, pal, or did we want to do the visuals first?
The only visual I really want to talk about is I found one called, it's one with a black background, and it's like the periodic table.
Oh, nifty. Yes, for instructional designer. I like that.
Yeah. And one of the things I've discovered is looking at this really helped. This is like, if I have literature I like to do, it's like I like the meta-analysis where somebody else has read the 57 articles and summarized it and squeezed it all together and stuff. I
love meta-analysis.
Yeah. And like if you look at group 1 in this column, like ID models, and they've got, 7 listed? I know there's more than 7. But every one of these...
This is actually an amazing graphic, man. I'm just looking at this, and I'm looking at like some of the, items that are on this table, and I'm going, okay, I recognize that. I don't recognize that. This would actually be something where I could probably have a couple of hours of Googling here and just fill in gaps in my own knowledge off of this thing. This is actually a very awesome graphic. Good job finding this one, man. Where did you locate this one? Where did this one come from?
It was in my digital clutter.
Dope. Love the digital clutter. Love it. Yeah, I'm doing a thing where I'm sharing something like 15 gigabytes worth of old pictures that I took when I lived in Qatar. So we're talking 10, 15 years ago, and I'm putting them all into a Google Drive, and I'm putting Google Drive folders, and I'm sharing the folders with my kids through Instagram messages. The Google Drive links, and I'm seeing all these pictures coming up from like 2010 and shit like this, and like a third of a lifetime ago. And it's just so seamless, the way that we can just do this stuff now. And I don't know, man. It's very interesting to me. This is an amazing table, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and some of the stuff, some of it's very biased. Like the modalities, there's no affective domain in there going on. Authoring is all just software. So there's some stuff that I don't really like, but overall, it's like, oh, this is a nice place to start.
Oh yeah, no, it's got like the I don't know. I could see like doing a. You see, it makes me want to turn it into a multimodal instructional object. It makes me go,
Yes.
okay, I could turn this into an H5P with a hotspot for each of these things, blow up the hotspot, and then here's a QR code associated with the hotspot, which then leads you to a whole personalized set of refs or whatnot, right? I mean, anything that can kind of get you thinking, okay, how does this work in practice? For me, that is an amazing graphic. I think I'm going to have to borrow that one for other times and places. That's good.
And I have the logo from the creator on the image, but I
Owly looking with a graduation cap. Yeah. Okay.
So there's somebody owned it. Somebody's done the work. If I could remember where, I just didn't keep track of it. But it is a lovely, lovely place to start. For people that don't know a lot about instructional design, if they went through and just came up with brief definitions in Wikipedia on each of those things, that would be a really nice grounding for where they could head as an educator.
Yeah, no, I like the fact that they got Blooms on here, backwards design, UDL, Camtasia. Some good stuff.
There's tons. These are all nice buzzwords that if you're sitting in a meeting with an instructional designer, these words are probably going to pop up in some combination.
Well, you have actually had the job, but when you were at an institution that shall remain nameless, that was your job though, right? Instructional designer. That was actually your job title for a time, correct?
I've done that at more than one place. I've done that at two institutions. Plus, I had my own little consulting company and did it on the side.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
As ever, you ask Doug for some personal backgrounds, and the result tends to be varied and dynamic and multifaceted. So go figure. Okay, well, that's something to even more inform our discussion as we literally do wind it down here. What's the word of the podcast, my friend?
Word of the podcast is instructional design, because we've said that phrase a bunch.
Well, it's a phrase, though, not a word, isn't it? That's my only thing. It's two words together, unless we were to hyphenate them. This is the English teacher in me, my friend.
Dude, I am not hyphenating that. Here, I'll change it for you. There. Oops. It's now ID. Because it's an abbreviation that's good.
Yeah. Okay, I can live with that. Okay, thank you for accommodating me. I can live with that. Yeah, okay. What's the question of the podcast?
The question of the podcast is a bit cheeky. I was in a bit of a mood. So, how can instructional design get past its nebulous soft boundaries that are too often imposed on ID practitioners?
Ooh, that's a good one. I like it.
We didn't really dig into that because a lot of times, since nobody knows what instructional designers technically do, right? People do know, but there's so many that don't know. It's like, oh, well, you do that. And it's like, nope, that's not me. I don't. I've had people tell me that, oh, well, instructional designers do. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. We do not. That is a technician. That's a course production technician, like very important person, very skilled, not me.
Right.
But with the soft boundaries.
I'm about making the map. I'm about,
I'm about those conversations.
Yeah, the learning, actually.
Yes, the learning aspect.
Learning first, man. Absolutely. And the phrase of the podcast, if we dare go there, what can that be, my friend?
I recognize that. I do not recognize that. This will help me to address gaps in my knowledge.
Right.
And I think that is so fantastic. That is the open mindset. That is the lifelong learner. That is so wonderful to me. It's such a nice way to end the podcast. It's the openness and how do we go from here, right? And it's not, oh man, I didn't know that, I'm an idiot. It's like, no, I didn't know that. Okay, let's go learn about it.
It's here's a phenomenon. Here's a thing that occurred, and let's look at this as holistically and with a view towards enhancing future experiences. It's not like, oh, woe is me, we didn't do this well. It's like, okay, we had this unique experience based on what we were capable of and what we knew at the time. And through that process, you can say the outcomes maybe weren't completely aligning necessarily, with a, predetermined thing. You can also go, well, there's a whole ton that got added. There's a whole lot of value that got added to that. So, there's never any harm in looking at what you've done realistically, clearly, without letting emotion get in the way. One thing I've been thinking about from Marcus Aurelius, kind of as I close out the year on a personal level, is particularly in this. I got two versions of the book that I read, and one of them is this pretty heavily annotated, historically sort of bound version. And one of the things I've been really getting away from, taking from that, is the notion that everybody has sort of the command center, right? They got their sensibility. It's where your reason is. It's where you give assent, you give permission to the impressions that circulate in the world. You give it, like you go, okay, does this affect me? How so? Right? You can't really affect what those impressions are because that's dependent on your surroundings, but you can confirm or deny approval to those impressions through your kind of guiding rational principle. And I've really been thinking about that whole notion of having, a robust, well-equipped command center with which to make sure that everything you're doing is actually an act of agency as opposed to just passive response or being based on something that's maybe more just habitual, right? And so for me, that becomes a matter of mindfulness, and because it's very in keeping with sort of being present in the moment to the full extent that you can be. So your question here, or the phrase, the whole sort of line that we're going out with is look at things as they are, look at things dispassionately with a view to future learning, growth, and improvement. To me, that's kind of an ideal towards which instructional design processes kind of can put you towards if you go about it the right way. So,
yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm glad you do, Doug. I feel like I've monopolized a lot. I know we're kind of going long here. I feel like I just one more thing that turns into 3 or 4 minutes.
I've got a bunch. We'll save that for the wrap up of the end of the year wrap up one we'll do next.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to that. Well, I don't know that I've got anything else here. We've gone through the visuals. We kind of gone through the
I think
phrase.
We wrapped it up nicely.
We've wrapped it up with a nice post-Festivus bow. We're in that weird period in between Christmas and Boxing Day where apparently it's Sunday. This is apparently, right? I'm going into work. I'm going to do some voluntary work in the office on Monday, so that's how I know it's Monday. But that's how I know today is Sunday. But still, we're. I'm just going to say I hope everybody has had a pleasant, stress-free holiday. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. Hope you're looking out for yourself and for those around you. And I think we're both looking forward to the next episode quite a lot. I guess that's it for me.
And happy Hogmanay, the Scottish
100%.
this time of year festivities. And otherwise, have a wonderful day.
Take care, everybody. Bye for now.